I should have known that summer was going to go sideways the second my dad missed the exit. We were headed to my uncle's cabin in northern Michigan. It wasn't some Instagrammable lake house with kayaks and Wi-Fi. It was an actual old log cabin, deep in the woods, surrounded by nothing but trees, mosquitoes, and the weird kind of silence that makes your ears ring. It was supposed to be a tech-free bonding trip, which meant no phone, no games, no nothing. Just me, my younger sister, my dad, and the damn forest. We were about 5 hours in when the GPS lost signal. Dad insisted he remembered the way from when he was a kid. I was sitting in the back, headphones off since I'd already burned through most of my music before we even left the city. My sister Emma was knocked out beside me, curled up with a sketchbook in her lap. Then the trees started getting weird. I know that sounds stupid. Trees are trees, right? But these weren't just regular pines. They looked off. Taller, maybe? Darker, even though it was barely past noon. The road narrowed from pavement to gravel, then dirt, and every time I asked if we were close, Dad just grunted and said something like, "I think it's just up ahead." We didn't pass any cars. No signs. Not even a mailbox. Eventually, we rolled up to a cabin, but it wasn't the one I remembered from a couple years ago. This one was older. Smaller. There were vines creeping up one side of it like nature had been trying to swallow it for years. Dad got out like nothing was wrong. "This isn't it," I said. He looked at me, eyebrows pinched. "Sure it is. Just fixed up a little since we last came." But that didn't make sense. The cabin we went to before had a wide porch, a dock on the lake, and faded red shutters. This one had no porch, no dock, and no shutters. Just dark wood, a crooked chimney, and a front door that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. "I don't think this is Uncle Mark's place," I said, stepping out reluctantly. Dad shrugged. "He said he'd done some work on it." That's when Emma woke up. She rubbed her eyes, looked around, and immediately frowned. "Where's the lake?" No one had an answer. We unloaded the car anyway. Dad had a key that fit somehow. He turned it in the lock like he'd done it 1,000 times, and the door creaked open into stale air that smelled like mothballs and old dirt. I didn't say anything more, but the hair on my arm stood up the moment I crossed the threshold. Not because it was cold. Because it felt like someone was watching us from inside the house. Inside, it was like stepping into someone else's memory. The living room was cramped, with this ugly green carpet that had long since surrendered to stains. The furniture looked like it had been thrifted in the 70s. Plaid cushions, wood frames, low and creaky. Dust coated everything. You could see the fingerprints we left just by brushing against the table. And that smell, it was more than just dust and time. It had this sharp, sour edge. Like something had rotted and no one ever cleaned it up. Dad didn't seem to notice. Or he was pretending not to. "I'll get the generator going," he said, tossing his duffel onto the couch. Emma and I stood near the door, backpacks still on. She looked at me, wide-eyed. "This isn't right," she whispered. I nodded. "I know. We should have made a bigger deal out of it. But we didn't. That's what gets me now." Looking back, it was like we both had this weird heaviness. Like arguing would take too much effort. Like something in the air made it easier to just go along with things. There was a hallway to the left that led to the bedrooms. Only two. One for Dad, one for us. Ours had twin beds pushed against opposite walls, thin mattresses that sank in the middle. The window had no screen, just a warped frame that barely opened, and flies buzzed around the sill like they'd been waiting for us. I checked my phone. No bars. Of course. When Dad finally got the generator working, it thudded to life somewhere out back, and the ceiling lights flickered on. Yellow, dim, and somehow worse than the dark. It made the shadows look thicker. "Kitchen stocked," Dad said from behind us. "Canned stuff, mostly." "Did Uncle Mark say he'd be here later?" I asked. Dad paused for a second too long. "No, just us this time." Emma tugged on my sleeve after he walked off. Did you hear that noise earlier? Like from inside? I had. But I pretended I hadn't. Probably the generator. She shook her head, but let it go. I think we both wanted to believe that. That night, we ate soup from a can, sitting around a dinner table that felt like it had absorbed every conversation that had ever happened around it. The kind of silence that hums in your ears settled over the place as soon as the spoons stopped clinking. Then, just before bed, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In the hallway, there was a picture on the wall. A black and white photo. A man, standing in front of the cabin. But it wasn't my uncle. And it wasn't this cabin. It was older. The trees behind him were smaller, younger, like the picture had been taken 50 years ago. But the man's face, even in the faded photo, his eyes were dark. Staring right into the camera. No smile. Just this flat, hollow stare. Emma came up behind me, looked at it, and whispered, "Who's that?" I had no idea. But I knew one thing. If this was Uncle Mark's cabin, someone had lived here long before us. And judging by that picture, they weren't exactly the warm, lake house grandpa type. That night I couldn't sleep. Emma had passed out quick, curled up on her side with her hoodie pulled over her head like she was trying to disappear. I stared at the ceiling, trying to ignore how thin the walls were. You could hear everything, the ticking of the old clock in the hallway, the low hum of the generator outside, the occasional groan of the wood shifting in the night air. And then there was the scratching. At first, I thought it was just some animal outside. A raccoon or something clawing at the walls. But after a few minutes, I realized it wasn't coming from outside at all. It was under the floorboards. It started slow, scritch, 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 like nails dragging along dry wood. Then it picked up, moving from one end of the room to the other, like whatever was under there was crawling around, trying to find a way up. I held my breath. My heart thumped so loud in my chest I was sure Emma could hear it. But she didn't move. Didn't stir. I sat up quietly, looking down at the floor. The scratching stopped. Dead quiet. Then thump. Something hit the underside of the floor. Hard. Directly beneath my bed. I jumped out of it so fast I knocked over a water bottle on the nightstand. Emma shot up with a gasp, her eyes wide. "What?" she whispered, panic instantly in her voice. "What happened?" I held a finger to my lips and pointed to the floor. For a moment neither of us moved. Then we heard it again, scritch scritch, thump. Emma grabbed my arm. "Is there something under us?" "I don't know," I whispered. "Maybe an animal. A possum or..." Thump. This time it was louder. Angry. Like it knew we were awake. Emma started crying, quiet and panicked. I pulled her close and tried to keep my voice calm. "Let's just go to Dad's room." We slipped out of the bedroom, down the hallway, careful not to step too hard. Every board creaked like a scream. When we reached Dad's door, I knocked softly, then again harder when he didn't answer. Nothing. "Dad?" I whispered. "Can we come in?" No response. I tried the handle. Locked. Why the hell would he lock the door? Emma started to ask something, but I put my hand over her mouth and pointed down the hall. Something had moved. Not fast. Not loud. Just enough to register. A slow creak from the living room, like someone, or something, had just stepped across the carpet. My skin went ice cold. "Back to the room," I mouthed to Emma. She nodded, and we backed away, step by step, barely breathing. But just before we reached the door to our room again, Emma looked down and froze. The floor. There were scratch marks. Fresh ones. Right outside our door. And they weren't animal scratches. They looked like fingernails. We didn't sleep after that. We sat in the bedroom with the light on, backs pressed to the wall, facing the door. Emma hugged her knees to her chest, eyes locked on the floor like she was daring it to move again. I tried to keep it together, but my mind was spiraling. Who or what scratches from underneath a house like that? It wasn't just the noise. It was the intent behind it. Like something was trying to scare us. I wanted to think it was an animal. A raccoon or a fox stuck under the house. But foxes don't make thump sounds. They don't hit the floor. And those scratches on the floor outside our door, they weren't random. They were in lines. 5 long, narrow gouges. Like fingers. When the light outside finally changed, just barely brighter than the black we'd been sitting in, I got up and opened the door. I expected Dad to be waiting in the kitchen, coffee brewing like none of this had happened. But he wasn't there. I knocked on his door again. Dad? Nothing. Dad, open up. No answer. So I went to the garage and grabbed a screwdriver. Came back, popped the lock open, heart pounding like crazy the whole time. When the door finally creaked open, I almost dropped the screwdriver. The room was empty. No suitcase. No sleeping bag. The bed hadn't been slept in. The covers were smooth and untouched, and the air didn't have that warm, lived-in smell. It was cold. Dusty. Emma appeared behind me, and I heard her gasp. "He's gone," I said, my voice sounding hollow. "But the car's still outside," she whispered. I walked the cabin 3 times, checked the front door, the back door, even the weird little pantry near the kitchen that barely fit 1 person. Nothing. The only way out was through a window or door, and nothing looked disturbed. No footprints in the dirt outside. No note. I walked around to the back to check the generator, thinking maybe he was back there messing with it. It was still humming along. But there was something weird on the ground nearby. Footprints. Not shoes. Bare feet. Big, wide prints in the dirt. Leading from the woods to the back wall of the cabin. And then just stopping. No turnaround. No trail going back. Just a line of human footprints that led to the house. Not from it. When I got back inside, Emma was standing at the hallway, staring at that black and white photo again. Her voice was soft, but shaking. "I swear his eyes are looking at me now." I wanted to tell her she was wrong. I wanted to laugh it off and say she was just tired. But when I looked at the photo again, I realized what was really bothering me about it. The man in the picture? He was standing in front of the same cabin we were in. But in the reflection of the window behind him, there was another man. Just barely visible. Standing inside the house. Watching him. By the time noon hit, I was spiraling. I'd checked every inch of the cabin, twice. Dad was just gone. No note. No sound. Nothing. It was like he'd never been here at all. But we saw him. He opened the door. He carried in the bags. He said something about soup. I asked Emma what she remembered, just to make sure I wasn't losing it, and she repeated it all back. Word for word. We agreed, he was here last night. And then he wasn't. That's when I got the stupid idea to look under the house. We hadn't even considered that whatever was scratching might still be down there. But I had to know. There was this hatch around the side of the cabin, one of those wooden trap doors that leads to a crawl space. It was half covered by weeds, like nobody had opened it in years. I pulled on the handle, and it groaned open with a snap so loud it made Emma jump. The air coming out was freezing. That's not normal, right? It's summer. Middle of June. No reason the air under the house should be that cold. I pulled my phone out, even though there was no signal, and turned on the flashlight. A tight beam lit up the crawl space, casting long, whittling shadows across dirt and rock. Cobwebs dangled from the beams. Something skittered across in the distance, probably a rat, but it moved fast. Too fast. "Don't go in," Emma said behind me. "I'm not. Just looking." But I leaned in a little further, and saw something. At first I thought it was a bundle of rags in the back corner, shoved near the wall. But as my light moved closer, I realized it wasn't fabric. It was skin. Gray, papery, curled like it had been peeled off. A patch of it. Roughly the size of a human hand. I scrambled back and slammed the hatch shut, heart hammering. I couldn't breathe for a full minute. "What?" Emma asked, panicked. "What did you see?" I didn't want to say it. I didn't want to name it out loud. Something's been under there. Something human. Or used to be. She didn't ask for more. We stayed inside the rest of the afternoon, windows shut, curtains closed. Every so often, we'd hear something from under the floor again. Not the scratching this time. Just faint movement. Like shifting weight. Something pacing beneath us. And the worst part? We didn't hear the generator anymore. When I went to check, it was dead. Not broken, unplugged. Like someone had physically pulled the cable. And I don't think it was my dad. When the sun dipped below the trees, the shadows inside the house deepened. Everything took on that weird blue-gray color that makes you feel like you're underwater. Emma was curled up with a blanket on the couch, eyes darting from shadow to shadow like she was trying to catch them moving. I was about to sit beside her when I heard it again. From under the floor. A voice. Not a full sentence. Just one word. Muffled, rasped, but clear enough. It said, "Down." I froze when I heard it. The voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It crawled up through the floorboards like a breath of cold air, wrapping itself around my spine. "Down." Emma heard it too. She sat bolt upright, staring at me like she needed me to tell her she'd imagined it. But I couldn't. "Did it say?" she whispered. "Yeah." We sat there in silence, both trying to process what that meant. Who says that? Who whispers that from under a house? 100 options ran through my head. A squatter. A trick. A prank. Something explainable. But none of them held up. Because that word, it wasn't casual. It was a command. After about an hour of pacing and arguing in whispers, I told Emma I was going to open the hatch again. She begged me not to. I didn't blame her. Every part of me wanted to listen. But Dad was still missing. The generator was unplugged. And something down there knew we were here. I had to see. This time, I brought a flashlight from the emergency kit. Heavy duty, the kind that can blind someone. I cracked the hatch and pointed the beam down into the crawl space. Nothing. Just dirt, beams, and low-hanging webs. Then I noticed something weird about the far wall. A sliver of dark, right where the foundation should have ended. I pushed the hatch open wider and dropped to my stomach, sticking my head and arms into the space. My light caught it, a gap. A rectangular hole in the back wall. Like a storm cellar or crawl tunnel. But it wasn't in the blueprints. It shouldn't be there. "Emma," I called. "There's a door." "No," she said instantly. "No way. We call the cops. We wait for someone to come. Please." I wanted to agree. But the look on her face told me she already knew that wouldn't happen. We had no service. No neighbors. No signal. And time felt like it was bending, like every minute in the cabin stretched longer than it should. I looked at the door again. Wood bolted with a rusted handle. Half buried in dirt. I crawled forward, flashlight shaking, and tugged. It opened. Behind it was a narrow shaft, dug directly into the earth. Not tall enough to stand in, barely wide enough for my shoulders. It curved downward, like a slide without the plastic. Just dirt and roots. And at the very bottom, maybe 15 feet down, my light caught a shape. Something pale. Unmoving. Lying in the dirt. I couldn't make out details. Just the edge of a shoulder, a leg bent wrong, bare feet covered in soil. It looked like a person. "Is it him?" Emma asked from the hatch. I wanted to say yes. I wanted it to be Dad. But something in me was screaming, "Don't go down there." So I did something I still don't fully understand. I turned off the flashlight. Just to see. And in the pitch black I heard movement. Not below me. Behind. In the crawl space. Right at my back. I didn't scream. I wanted to. Every cell in my body was vibrating with panic, but I bit down on it because I knew, somehow, that if I made a sound, it would respond. The thing behind me wasn't breathing. It wasn't shifting like a person crawling through the dirt. It was just there. Still. Waiting. The silence pressed against my ears like water pressure. I was frozen half inside the tunnel, half in the crawl space, with the flashlight gripped tight in my hand. My fingers felt numb. I couldn't see a thing. And then I felt it. A breath. Not wind. Not a draft. A slow, wet exhale, brushing the back of my neck. That's when I snapped. I twisted around in the dirt, slammed my elbow into something solid, maybe the beam, maybe it, and scrambled backward like an animal. My flashlight flared back to life, bouncing across the crawl space. Nothing. No one. Just disturbed dust hanging in the air, tiny particles catching the beam like snow. Emma was shouting my name from above. I clawed my way out of the hatch and collapsed onto the grass beside the cabin, sucking in air like I'd been drowning. "What happened?" she asked, kneeling beside me. "There was something behind me. Did you see it?" I shook my head. No. But it was there. I felt it. It breathed on me. Her face paled. "We need to go. Now." We ran inside, grabbed our bags, nothing else. Just what we could carry. Emma didn't even put on her shoes. The plan was to make for the road, hike out, flag down a car, anything. But when I tried to open the front door, it wouldn't budge. Deadbolt was gone. I mean, physically gone. The hole where the lock used to be was just empty wood. So I tried the back door. Same thing. Every window? Nailed shut. From the outside. We even tried the bedroom window, where the screen had been missing. Now it was covered with wood planks. "What the hell?" I whispered. We didn't hear any hammering. Nothing. That's when I noticed it, the picture on the hallway wall. It had changed. The man in the photo, the one with the cold, dead stare, was still there. But now there were two new figures in the background. Barely visible. Faces blurry. Standing in the window behind him. One tall. One small. Emma grabbed my arm, trembling. "That's us." She was right. It was us. Standing inside the house. In a picture that had to be decades old. We didn't speak. Couldn't. There was nothing left to say. This place wasn't a vacation cabin. It wasn't even my uncle's. It was a trap. And we were inside it now. And then, just before the lights cut out for good, we heard it again. From beneath the floorboards. Not scratching this time. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Coming up. The lights went out so fast it felt like the house exhaled them. 1 second we were bathed in that dim yellow glow, and the next, nothing. Just pitch. No buzz. No flicker. No warning. Like someone had yanked the cord on the entire cabin. Emma whimpered next to me. I grabbed her hand. We stood completely still in the dark, listening. The footsteps were slow. Deliberate. They weren't trying to hide. They wanted us to hear. Wood creaked under the weight, step, pause, step. Starting beneath the house, then climbing. The sound moved from below the bedroom to the hall. Closer. I pulled us into the nearest room, the kitchen, and eased the door shut behind us. I dropped low, flashlight off, our backs pressed to the cabinet under the sink. I could hear Emma's breath, sharp, fast, and shallow. I squeezed her hand twice. Her way of knowing I was still there. Then the footsteps reached the hallway. And stopped. We held our breath. The silence was worse than the footsteps. It stretched on and on, like the house was holding its lungs too. Then something dragged across the floor. Not footsteps now. It sounded like something soft. Heavy. Like a bag of wet clothes being pulled across hardwood. It moved past the kitchen door. I almost dropped the flashlight. I was shaking so bad. I wanted to peek. I needed to see what it was. So I slid forward, just an inch, and tilted my head toward the crack in the door. At first, I didn't see anything. Then it came into view. Just the edge of it. A hand. Grayish. Skin hanging loose, like it had dried and shrunk around the bone. The fingers were long, too long. and the nails, black, cracked, curling under like claws. It dragged itself forward, one arm at a time, pulling the rest of its body behind. The head came next. Hairless. Pale. Eyes sunken in so deep they were just dark holes. But the mouth, God, the mouth was stretched into this horrible, sagging smile. Like someone had carved it wider than it was supposed to go. And in its other hand, it held a shirt. Dad's shirt. The flannel one he always wore when we went camping. I recognized the tear on the sleeve. It was soaked in something dark. I pulled back. My whole body screamed to run, but I couldn't. I couldn't let it hear us. The thing slithered past the door, dragging Dad's shirt behind it. Emma squeezed my arm. Her mouth was near my ear. It's looking for us. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but I couldn't. Because the thing stopped. Right outside the kitchen. It turned. And we heard it sniff. Not a normal sniff. It sounded wet. Hungry. Then a rasping voice. Not from its mouth. From under the floor again. It said, "Found one." When it said, "Found one," the air in the kitchen turned thick. Like it was pushing down on us, making it hard to breathe, like we were underwater and didn't know it until just then. Emma started to cry, but silently. Her face buried into my arm, her shoulders shaking. I held her close, not sure if we were about to die or go somewhere worse. The thing outside the door didn't move at first. It just stood, or crouched, or whatever it did, with that shirt still dragging from its hand, like it was showing us what would happen if we didn't listen. Then it spoke again. Not in words this time. Just a sound. A low, guttural click from deep in its throat. And then from beneath us, from under the floors, something responded. Click. 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 I didn't wait to hear what came next. I clicked on the flashlight and threw open the back door. It was unlocked. I swear to God, it had been jammed before, stuck shut, sealed tight. But now it opened like nothing was ever wrong. Almost like it wanted us to run. "Go!" I hissed to Emma, pushing her through. We tore across the backyard, crashing through the brush and branches, the flashlight beam jumping wildly as I ran. The forest swallowed us whole, and the cabin vanished behind the trees. But the sound didn't stop. Behind us, click. 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 And then something moving fast. Faster than it should have been able to. Like it didn't run, it just glided. Emma tripped once. I pulled her back up. My chest was on fire, lungs begging to stop. But I didn't. We kept running until we saw it. The road. Just a 2-lane stretch of cracked asphalt, cutting through the trees like salvation. I didn't even look. We sprinted across and collapsed in the ditch on the other side. Silence. Not total. Just the kind that comes when something is watching you. I risked one look back. There was the tree line. The cabin hidden behind it. Nothing moved. No figure. No sound. Just the wind, rustling leaves. We waited there, crouched in the ditch until the sun started bleeding up over the horizon. Eventually, a car came down the road, a pickup, rusted and slow. The guy driving barely had time to react before I ran out waving both arms like a lunatic. He braked hard and nearly hit me. He drove us into town. Said we were lucky. Said no one really goes that deep into the woods anymore, not since the fires years ago. "What fires?" I asked. He gave me a look. "The old Markham property. Burned down in the 80s. Cabin used to sit on a basement dug by hand, illegal, unstable. Whole thing collapsed. They said squatters lived there after, but folks around here don't go near it." I said nothing. Emma didn't either. We didn't tell him our last name. Didn't tell him Dad was gone. Didn't tell him that there was no fire damage on the cabin we just escaped from. Because whatever we found out there, whatever found us, hadn't burned. It was still alive. Or something close to it. We stayed in a motel on the edge of town, One of those old roadside places where the keys are still actual keys and the vending machine hasn't been restocked since 2005. The guy who checked us and didn't ask questions. We looked like hell, covered in dirt, scratched up, barefoot, and shaking. Emma didn't talk much. Just curled up under the motel blanket like it could protect her from what we saw. I kept replaying it all in my head, the cabin, the crawlspace, the photographs, the thing. The way the doors had locked us in and then, just as suddenly, let us go. As if it had only wanted us to know something. To see it. And Dad? Still gone. We tried calling the police the next morning. Gave them the story, well, a version of it. That we'd gotten lost, found an old cabin, and now our dad was missing. We didn't mention the voice, or the skin, or the thing that dragged itself across the floor. They sent a ranger. We waited at the station for hours, drinking vending machine coffee and jumping every time the door opened. When the ranger finally returned, he looked off. Pale. Like he'd seen something and was trying real hard not to let it show. "Search the property," he said. "No sign of your father. Or anyone." "What about the cabin?" I asked. He hesitated. "There's nothing there but a foundation. Burned out decades ago. Ground's unstable, unsafe. You kids should be been out there." I blinked. "No. That's not right. We were there. The cabin was intact. There was furniture. Doors. Windows. We slept there." He didn't answer. Just wrote something down in his notebook and told us they'd keep looking. But I could see it in his face. They wouldn't find him. Because whatever that place was, it wasn't always there. Or maybe it wasn't there for everyone. Maybe it finds you when you're vulnerable. When you're lost. When your guard's down and you're stupid enough to trust memory and maps. I asked Emma what she remembered most. She didn't say the voice, or the thing that crawled. She didn't say, "Dad," she said, "the picture." I knew exactly which one. And here's the thing, this is why I'm writing this. Last night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking I heard something scratching on the motel wall. Just faint, soft, like a whisper turned solid. I sat up around 3 a.m., turned on the lamp, just needing to prove nothing was there. But on the table by the bed, where Emma had left her sketchbook, there was a drawing she hadn't made before. It was charcoal, rough, rushed, but clear. The cabin. The hallway. And that black and white photo. Only this time, there were 3 people in the window. The tall man. The small girl. And a third one, blurry and pale, standing behind them. Face stretched in a grin too wide for a human mouth. I asked Emma if she drew it. She shook her head, her eyes already filling with tears. "I think it's still with us," she whispered. And I believe her. Because I can still hear it sometimes. Not loud. Just beneath everything. In the vents. In the walls. In the floorboards. Scratching. Waiting. Saying the same word, over and over again. "Down."